All right, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone on the call today is doing well. My name is Jeremy Bendewald, Principal in charge of Forensic Services for Eide Bailly, and I would like to thank you for attending our webinar today on Cybersecurity Incident Response COVID-19. For those of you on the call today that are unfamiliar with Eide Bailly, we are a top 25 CPA firm with over 40 offices in 15 states and more than 2,500 partners and staff. We are committed to providing content and solutions to our clients like those we will be discussing today and many others. I am joined today by Jason Olson and Isaac De La Garza, both outstanding talents and professionals within our Forensic Services Department. For the webinar today, we will be discussing the increase in cybersecurity incident events amid the COVID-19 pandemic and the schemes and techniques used by bad actors during this crisis. Jason Olson is my partner in our Minneapolis office and will share his experiences in client matters involving incident response breaches. He has assisted clients alongside their attorneys when deploying our digital forensic and network forensic experts to preserve, identify, and remediate when a cybersecurity event has occurred. We will also hear from Isaac De La Garza, who is on the front line of our breach investigation team and has conducted hundreds of data collections and investigations involving computer data crimes, breaches, and civil litigation matters. By way of overview, our team within the forensic services practice is involved in many different disciplines, from financial investigations, so-called fraud matters, to economic damages and business interruption calculations, to e-discovery or electronic discovery, and all types of computer forensics, including cell phone forensics. We have 3 digital forensic labs in Minneapolis, Oklahoma City, and Salt Lake City, and professionals in 8 different cities across Eide Bailly's footprint. As I mentioned earlier, Eide Bailly is committed to providing content through our webinars as well as solutions for our clients, as depicted here in our cybersecurity offering. Both Jason and Isaac will be focusing on what we have learned relative to incident response matters, including the risks associated during this current COVID-19 pandemic, and be providing you with knowledge on the schemes deployed, security considerations, and ultimately end with protections, prevention tips, and things that you guys can take away from this webinar. The forensic analysis component is kind of our focus for the webinar today, and that our team, including myself, have been involved with forensic services for decades. And with that, I will turn it over to Jason Olson to get started on our content. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Jeremy. So thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar as well. It's really important to cover what's happening as of recent from the uptick in incidents that we're seeing across our client and prospect base. As it's reflected here, the FBI put out a warning for business email compromise attacks as of March 3rd, 2020 of this year, prior to most of the remote work environment that many of us are facing today. This warning relates to Office 365 and Google G Suite use. They're seeing a lot more targets against users of these type of systems and phishing kits that are there to compromise user credentials. In fact, the phishing kits that have been out there have increased significantly in the dark web. There are over 5,000 phishing kits in 2019, and they've significantly increased in the number of phishing kits available into 2020. And those phishing kits have been designed for Office 365, Google G Suite, Amazon, and other third-party websites used to capture user credentials for nefarious purposes, including PayPal. And the whole point there is to compromise those user credentials to then use them for bad acts, such as Office 365. Once they have the user credentials, they're able to log in, monitor emails, communications with internal and external parties to gain an understanding of information related to financial transactions. For example, how your organization may send out financial information such as invoices to customers, bank routing, ACH account information, and intercept those communications and eventually impersonate those communications with a thought or intent to defraud a party and absconding with those funds by having funds being wired or ACH to some place in which the bad actors can get access to. And they're also grabbing other contact information at the same point in time for other possible future phishing attacks. And these phishing kits that are more prevalent, more available now on the dark web are made in such a manner that they're easier for less technical individuals to use. So it's becoming pretty concerning as to how these phishing kits are being distributed. The costs are becoming less to purchase these phishing kits. So they become more available, they're less costly, and they're better at detecting the initial vector pointer intrusion. So why talk about that warning when it comes to COVID-19? Well, this pandemic is creating an interesting opportunity for these bad actors to capitalize on everyone's fear, the fact that we're working remotely, and just the fact of that less human interaction, which is important when it comes to verifying ACH, bank routing, account number information changes. We're losing that human-to-human connection there where we're able to verify requests for changes. And what they also are seeing is an increase or a rise in business email compromise schemes that involve the spoofing of the World Health Organization, the economic stimulus checks, and the U.S. Centers for Disease and Prevention. Of course, many of us are interested in learning about today's news, whether it comes from these organizations or relief from a monetary perspective. And so these bad actors have found ways to spoof these organizations with the thought or the ability or intent to capture user credentials for compromise down the road. Here's one example, and it's a little grainy to read, but essentially what this email represents is an attachment in which an organization is being spoofed where they're indicating that they have had a case of COVID-19 within the office and that they're going to send letters to all families of employees. And before they do that, they want everyone to review the attached document about what is being said within this COVID-19 notification. And of course, the whole intent there is to get users to click on that attachment, which then would release malicious software. Again, just another way in which these bad actors are using today's COVID-19 and our fears to possibly commit intrusion into an organization. Here's another example. A financial institution received an email allegedly from a CEO of a company who previously recorded a transfer of $1 million or scheduled a transfer. And they asked for it to be moved up because of the coronavirus outbreak and quarantine processes and precautions. So of course, there's a rush to make a transaction or a transfer happen. And of course, the email address used by the fraudsters was almost identical to the CEO's actual email address with only one change to the letter in the email address. And here's a good example. On the left is my real email address. On the right is the fake or the spoofed email address. And quite frankly, we see this quite often. It's one change of a character, either addition or removal. And at a quick glance, it appears to be one and the same. And so hopefully our organizations and the individuals that work within these organizations are taking more time to review these emails and these spoofed emails, but it certainly can catch people off guard, and it certainly has. So most common to least common schemes that we're seeing, something has never changed. What is the easiest way to attack an organization, obtain the information that may be of value and could be used to obtain or abscond with funds from organizations? Phishing, social engineering is certainly the most common. As I mentioned, you can buy phishing kits online. And so many individuals and organizations, or bad actors, I should say, are using that information to compromise individuals and entities. And we're seeing more of that activity. And so that would be most common compared to your denial of services or distributed denial of services and network attacks. A little bit more sophisticated, so they're least common. Again, phishing counts for roughly over 80% of the attacks against organizations. And so if we can strengthen our controls around that area, whether it be technology controls or even financial controls when it comes to verification of changes to routing and account information, hopefully we can mitigate the risks related to phishing and social engineering. And oftentimes when the compromises occurs, from what we're seeing is, it's one thing about the money that is absconded with by the bad actors. Certainly that's important. The sooner we identify nefarious activity, possible theft of funds, the quicker we can notify the authorities, whether it be federal authorities, local law enforcement, your bankers, things of that nature. That's important. Timing is important. If we can have that communication with 72 hours or less, there may be a possibility of some sort of recovery. But on the other hand, it's not only about the money, it's also about the data in which your organization has in its possession. Oftentimes what we're seeing is, if it's a compromise of Office 365 or Google G Suite, the question then becomes, what kind of data does your organization handle whether it sends out or receives, that could be protected information, whether it be health information or other information about individuals, such as date of birth, driver license numbers, social security numbers. For example, what we do see is, for example, organizations receive W-9s via email. Well, certain W-9s may have social security numbers on there for their vendors. And so right there would be protected information. What we've also heard too is for example, from a client's perspective, our organization is good about protecting protected information. However, maybe clients send that organization protected information. What are you doing to mitigate that risk of having that information available within those email accounts? So it's always important to be thinking about their data, because what happens with the compromise, that creates liability for the organization once they identify a compromise. Then it becomes, what did that bad actor or bad actors have access to? And if they compromised the global administrator rights or credentials, then they had access to all the email accounts within the organization, but what data resides in everyone's email inbox. And not to mention, does your organization have a data retention destruction policy? Do you have emails going back 10, 15 years? Again, that just creates more risk from a data protection perspective and possible liability.
All right, so today's, I want to talk about a few things. We're going to get into phishing. I think it's important to discuss what phishing looks like and how the coronavirus pandemic has affected some of the attacks and how they're being generated. So our learning objectives will review what phishing is and identify some key elements and some indicators common to phishing scams, and see why it's so important to recognize these key indicators so that we can recognize these phishing scams early. Then we'll take a step back and examine the social engineering piece of phishing scams. Also see how phishing opens the door for, like Jason was mentioning, more adverse actions such as ransomware or other types of data breaches. Then we'll add the coronavirus element into some of these attacks and discover how bad actors are trying to monetize from the global fear that has been caused by COVID-19. We'll see some examples of some of those attacks currently out in the wild. Then we'll go into the convenience over security and how this mentality may be getting a few organizations and a few people in trouble. Then we'll go for some of the more protective actions that we can take to protect ourselves from these types of attacks. So phishing is almost always the precursor to the bigger data breaches, the more adverse actions. Unfortunately, phishing is just the beginning to some of the more critical hacks that we've seen. We'll break down phishing, like I said, in a few of the next slides. But for now, let's map out the role phishing plays in major data breaches. So the main idea of this slide is to bring to light that phishing commonly introduces ransomware, of course, that can victimize the entire organization, or it can facilitate a business email compromise that can compromise, like Jason was saying, some very important organizational information and or your client's information. And also, phishing can introduce a platform for cyber criminals to carry out illegal activity such as cyber extortion and other types of activity from your environment. So the events leading up to a compromise, or what we like to call the incident precursor, is generally the opportunity to exploit. Simply receiving the phishing email doesn't mean you're compromised. It's just the opportunity to be compromised. So as an example, the precursor could be the phishing email itself. Within the email, there's always going to be some bait that is tempting us to interact with the lure. And lures are usually links or attachments. And these lures will basically almost always dramatically increase the chances of data breaches. Many times a lure will take our computers to a fake website where our credentials will be harvested, or to a website that will download malware altogether. And other times we see that it's an attachment that may carry the instructions for the computer to download the malware on its own. Then the actual cause of the compromise, or the incident vector, is the actual adverse actions that happened when we interacted with the lure or we clicked on the link. For incident responders, it's important to find this activity sooner rather than later. It's basically a priceless piece of information for the investigation. It will set a precedent for the investigation, and it will help us correctly contain the breach. It will help us faster eradicate the malware or the intruders and remediate the systems, as well as mitigate any future risks from this attack. Now I want to take a quick time out, and I feel it's important to say here that if you or anyone in your organization clicks on a suspicious link, it's important to document the date and time that it was clicked. A lot of us tend to, or a lot of users tend to hide their actions or delete the email immediately because they're afraid of maybe some repercussions. But it's important to not delete the email or the attachments. And the reason for that is because it helps the investigation, it helps the IT admin kind of chase down what has happened in the system or in the email. And by preserving that, the investigation will be completed sooner. Also, notify your IT immediately so that the correct isolation of the device or the accounts can happen. By changing the passwords to the systems that we feel may be compromised, and then immediately call in the incident response team that can safeguard some of the evidence and document some of the events that have occurred in case it's needed down the road. So we'll continue on here, and the biggest challenge for incident responders to prevent phishing attacks and cyber attacks altogether is people. Cybersecurity is a people problem. There is a technology element, and I'll describe how kind of the workflow of how, from a technology perspective, we try to prevent some of these actions. So basically what we do is whenever we respond to an incident, we'll gather this threat intelligence, like what the vector was, what the precursor was, and we will then use this intel to enhance our detection mechanism. This could be a device, or it could be another system that is scanning emails. But unfortunately, the only thing the scammer has to do is change one small variable to the attack. It could be changing the subject of the email or changing where it's coming from, and that way our detection mechanism doesn't detect it anymore. Also, whenever you identify a phishing email and you click on report this as suspicious, and some of us may have that option in our email tools where if we see a suspicious email, we can report that to IT. Well, that's what that's doing. It will analyze that metadata, the information of that email, and it will enhance our detection mechanism. But like I said, unfortunately, one small detail can be changed and it will bypass some of that detection. So this is where the people aspect comes in. Training and awareness of some of these cybersecurity events may be the last line of defense from cyber attackers, and in many cases, it's the only line of defense. Another of the challenges that we've seen for us are links. It's not uncommon for us to see legitimate technology provide links in email, and I mean, don't get me wrong, they're great and effective ways and to be productive within email. But I have found that having links in our emails have desensitized the users to some of the dangers of the internet as well. We must be vigilant and careful not to get too comfortable with links. So I want to step backwards here, and let's break down some of the elements of PHISH. So what is phishing? And basically, phishing is social engineering in a digital context, or in the context of an email in this case, which brings me to the first element of phishing, which is social engineering. All of the phishing emails that I've analyzed have had this component embedded into them. It makes the bait a little more attractive to us, the social engineering aspect. So social engineering is the act of manipulating or fooling people to obtain something of value. And notice I say something of value. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a list of items with a price on them. With business email compromises, I've seen sometimes that there's a misconception on the severity of a business email compromise. In many cases, a phishing attack's goal will be to gain access to your mailbox, but it's not always the goal. Some of us may think, well, so what if my inbox was compromised? I don't have my 7 herbs and spices recipe in my email. And that may be true, but to others, it may not be so true. Some of us may have, like Jason was saying, we might have some protected information in there that that may have value. All data to some degree has value. Even the list of emails can be bought and sold in the dark web. On the screen, like I mentioned, you'll see prices of what this data is going for on the dark web. So let's take, for example, the list of approximately 200 emails. And we see that it's $5, and it's not a lot for 20,000 emails. But let's consider that this isn't talking about our personal contacts. It's talking about the mailing list from our website's newsletter, or the subscribers to our marketing campaigns and other business-related contacts. So on average, taking those considerations, on average, that's only about one small to medium-sized business's mailing list. Also, the US-based credit cards with verification numbers. In this case, it doesn't matter if it's an active card or an old card. They're willing to pay anywhere from $1 to $6, and they'll go and do that work to see if they're active or not. So we're seeing where bad actors are monetizing from this type of data alone. This is without ransomware. This is without an intrusion into your networks. This is just with a simple business email compromise. And so they're sitting on the beach somewhere, social engineering people from their cell phones just on these types of lists. And not to mention, most of our inboxes has valuable intelligence that these bad actors can use to elaborate further scams or another scam in the future, which leads us to the next element of phishing, and this is familiarity. So how do they know what is familiar to us? Well, phishing emails try to provide a false sense of security by using the right design or the right logos, the right colors and fonts, and they're getting better and better at this. The goal is obviously not to raise any suspicions and to get people to fall victim of the phishing scam. There's methods of phishing vary. They can be a pop-up advertisement, a social media message, a text message, and of course, emails. Phishing emails that look familiar because of what they have in the content have been known to use our birthdays, our age, personal information like the name of our dog or cat, the positions that we hold at work. Basically, if you see a suspicious email that has a familiarity element, with your birthday or something personal, it generally means one of two things. It means either the information that they're using is in public space somewhere, on a business website or a website from church or a group that you're in, as much as from social media, etc. Or it can mean that one of your peers' mailboxes has been compromised. A good example would be, our dog groomer, for example. So if the email contains a deeper level of knowledge into privileged conversations, such as requesting changes to wire instructions at exactly the right time and date and to the right people. This is called conversation hijacking. And this generally means that somebody's email inbox has been compromised for a while now. And it's been compromised long enough that the bad actor has a deeper level of understanding about the conversations and the information within the mailbox, and even your work habits and what you may be and the role you may play at work. It also means that the actor has probably been waiting for the right time to strike, kind of planning and scheming in order to maximize the scam's effectiveness. And probably if you have been victimized by conversation hijacking, more than likely they're trying to pull a scam on many different recipients all at once to try to, again, maximize the effectiveness of the scam. So beware of emails with links with personal information or changing of banking account information. The best way that I like to describe to some of our clients on how phishing introduces evil is through its links. In many ways, it's like vampires in old B movies. They can't just brute force their way into their victims' houses. In a way, bad actors and vampires have the same limitations to their powers, if you would. They can't do evil unless you invite them in, whether you know they are a vampire or not. The last element that I'd like to touch on here is the sense of urgency. Why do they play with urgency? Well, in the phishing world, it's to try to make us think that something has happened that requires us to act faster. The faster that we fall, the quicker they can move on to the next phase of the scam where they can start to see a monetary benefit. This is the element that bad actors are exploiting with the coronavirus. They're very opportunistic in this sense. But even it's important to note that also, even before the coronavirus pandemic, the two most exploited topics in the phishing world, if you would, are fear and greed. So beware of any emails coming our way that are playing on our fear or playing on greed or how to get rich amidst the COVID-19 phishing scams. In these next slides, I want to point out, excuse me, some examples of phishing that we've seen. So here's some generic examples that are, or seemingly are often sent from addresses that look official, and there's the familiarity aspect. Notice on this email, the 0 in place of the O in the word gov. And also the link that they're showing us here is not a legitimate IRS website link. Clicking on this link would take us to a fraudulent website with a form to enter personal information that looks like the IRS an IRS form, but is a fraudulent form to try to get your social security number and date of birth and things like that. The second email example here is a good example of the mouse over technique to verify where the link is going to take us. So if we do a mouse over, a lot of us already know this, but I'd like to rehash. If we mouse over a link, it will pop up with a dialog box that shows us the destination of that click. If something like that looks suspicious, I encourage everyone to do the mouse over technique on all links. I always tell everyone I speak to, no exceptions. Look just to make sure. If something looks suspicious or of concern, contact your IT administrator. I'm sure they would appreciate you doing the work or doing this small investigation to try to safeguard your account. And the third example is one we've seen here recently that I found was very creative. It's an email that is coming from the right person and is asking if they're up for a quick task and to get back ASAP. There's the element of of urgency, right? Also notice, I noticed on this email, and it made me realize how desensitized we are becoming to some of these auto response boxes. We're seeing them more and more in technology that we're using, and in this case, these links, all of these links were malicious. So be careful when clicking on things. Now I want to add the COVID-19 element to some of these attacks that we're seeing in the wild. Basically, what they're doing is they're enhancing the effectiveness of phishing scams by playing on the enhanced fear of the public, and they increase the likelihood of clicks by doing this. We're seeing that COVID-19 themed phishing is tempting victims with information about infection heat maps or important safety information that they don't know about. And they do this by impersonating health organizations like the CDC. And unfortunately, the coronavirus pandemic is bringing out a lot of the big sharks from the deep web. We're anticipating a lot of ransomware attacks, as well as a high level of intrusions in the upcoming months because of the coronavirus. And also, Jason started talking about the deep web, and we're seeing increasing activity from APT groups. An APT group is an advanced persistent threat group. It's basically like a cyber gang, and they are increasing their activity around COVID-19. We know that the coronavirus is a serious issue, and so do they. Threat actors are using these themes to introduce evil into networks left and right, kind of hand over fist, if you would, into our networks. And also, Jason was talking about phishing kits. And phishing kits is basically a set of instructions that have a COVID-19 theme that are available for purchase on the dark web. So what does this mean? It means that there are hackers teaching hackers how to phish us with the COVID-19, with the fear of COVID-19. It's also important to know the surface web is where Google and Wikipedia live. The deep web is where the resources or the servers, like our social media accounts and our email accounts, anything that we log into with a username and password is in the deep web. And then the dark web is only accessible by specialized technology. This is where all of the illegal activity, such as drug trafficking and illegal transactions, kind of take place. So reports of email phishing campaigns using this theme related lures surfaced almost immediately after confirmed infections began increasing in January. Health organizations such as the World Health Organization, the CDC, and CSSE, that's the Center for Systems Science and Engineering at Johns Hopkins University, are prime targets because of the perceived sense of authority that these organizations portray to us. APT groups are taking advantage of this perceived sense of authority and are actively spinning up phishing campaigns to infect us and to compromise us. This banner I created in 2 to 3 minutes. Can you detect anything suspicious in this banner? So for all of you that detected the misspelling on the button, you're right. That's exactly right. But now let's consider if I wouldn't have made a spelling error there. Let's consider how many of us may have found this lure interesting, or how many of our peers may have found this lure interesting. Next slide is the actual phishing kit that we're seeing in the dark web. And the Johns Hopkins Center for Systems Science and Engineering have developed this heat map. It's a legitimate tool used by Johns Hopkins, and it's hosted by them. They use it to track the spread of the coronavirus. And threat actors are now faking this information. And many have already built phishing campaigns to redirect you to a malicious website with a malicious payload. So as I stated, as both Jason and I stated previously, this phishing kit is available on dark web for $200. The ad in the dark web for this phishing kit reads, new exploit and coronavirus map phishing method. It continues to say, coronavirus is now in all news, and it gets 10,000 newly infected people every day with a growing speed. This is a hot topic. Offered method allows us to send a payload preloader masked as a map. And in exclamation points it says, the preloader has file extensions which can be sent as attachments by any email service directly. It can even send to Gmail as an attachment too. See video tutorial, buy now. And this phishing kit is only $200. APT groups, like I stated, are basically like cyber gangs. They're looking to capitalize by committing internet crimes. One of these groups is called the Mummy Spider Group. They are impersonating the health organizations with COVID-19 themed phishing. They're sending emails with attachments that will download some pretty nasty variants of malware. Basically, the malware that you will install if you take the bait from this group is one that will phone home. Basically, it will open a back door. It will allow the intruders in. And what this group likes to do is they like to lay dormantly for anywhere from 3 to 9 months to do their reconnaissance, kind of move around and see what is of value within your network. And then after, anywhere from 6 to 9 months, they begin the real work. This group has been known to operate in the United States, so be careful. The Band Racer Group, its first 2020 appearance was with a COVID-19 theme attack. And what this is telling most of us in the forensic community is that groups are coming out of the woodwork and taking advantage of this fear. On the screen, we'll see an example of a fake email impersonating the World Health Organization. The button there will redirect you to a malicious site that will harvest your credentials. There's other examples of impersonations. I wanted to highlight that it's not just health organizations that are being impersonated. The FBI has a few warnings already for some of these schemes, but some other prime targets for impersonation from these groups are charitable contributions, anything from general financial relief, airline carrier refunds, fake cures and vaccines, and fake testing kits is circulating right now, and it's popular within the phishing scope during the coronavirus pandemic. So another way that the coronavirus is affecting cybersecurity, and Jason started to mention, is by disassociating employee relations due to the shelter in place. So shelter in place can be used as a divide and conquer tactic if we let it. We recently responded to an incident where bad actors compromised email systems and impersonated the right people with the authority to request changes in the wire payments to overseas bank accounts. They did this by impersonating like I said, they did this by impersonating the right person. And it wasn't detected by any kind of detection mechanism or anything out of the technology bag of tricks, if you would. It was detected by office chatter. If it weren't for that communication that people have with one another within the workplace, this attack wouldn't have been detected as soon as it was. So now that we don't have the interactions with our coworkers, we should be very vigilant to phishing that leverages our inability to just simply walk over to the office next door or the cubicle next door to see why they're sending us emails with wonky characters in the subject lines. During shelter in place, it's important to exercise associated communications with our coworkers over the phone. I encourage everyone to reach out regularly and find out what their state is from a phishing perspective. If they've seen anything suspicious, if they maybe have been targeted by phishing, so that everyone can be aware. So since we're on the topic of shelter in place and the at-home workforce, it's also important to note that the coronavirus pandemic has caused a spike in downloading and usage of remote productivity technologies, such as Zoom, Office 365, and Microsoft Teams. All of these technologies are wonderful. I love them and use them every day. And they have the capability to share, to invite, and collaborate easily with our clients and our coworkers alike. So all of these technologies also have functions and features that will make our jobs easier too. And they're literally just a click away to enable them. However, we must be really careful not to tip the scale for convenience over security when it comes to these features, which takes us to our next section. So remote technologies and the convenience over security is something that we do have to be vigilant over. The coronavirus overwhelmed us, especially IT departments, relatively quickly. I would like to kind of point out and give a round of applause, right, to the IT staff that worked super hard to make sure that our productivity was still a thing from the at-home workforce. They did a great job, but I do feel that it's important to note that some of these features and remote technologies could also be a security vulnerability. As a security professional, enabling these features on existing software or installing new software requires rigorous testing and discussions, risk assessments and so forth. No one had time to do this, I understand, but it begs to question, were the appropriate risk assessments and discussions had to implement this technology at the at-home workforce? And probably not. I think that we need to consider that opening these features into our technology or into our everyday productivity may also have its vulnerabilities. I would like to consider some of these vulnerabilities. For instance, let's consider how many features of these features were enabled, how many cloud services were opened up to clients per se, or new users added to our systems. How many clients are now part of our shared groups and folders, as well as applications that are opened for mobile access now. Password sharing, I know there's a lot of people that still do password sharing for different features and different programs at the workplace. And more than likely, password sharing has been happening through email. And just like Jason was alluding to some of the information in our mailboxes, password sharing and finding username and passwords in compromised email accounts has its own deep implications when it comes to responding, especially whenever we're trying to answer the attorney's question as to what was compromised. Whenever we see a username and password to a different system, that has to be assumed as compromised as well. So consider that. Also, let's consider how many personal computers that are infected with something are accessing our information, and how many networks are vulnerable that are accessing our information. On the screen, I wanted to show a different type of phishing attack. It's a COVID-19 theme attack, but this one doesn't come in from an email. This one comes in from a compromised router, an at-home router. So compromised home routers are displaying in the browser when we browse out to the internet. For example, let's let's pretend that I'm at home and I wanted to go to google.com. And if my router is compromised, it will redirect my request. Instead of giving me the Google page, it will give me a malicious redirect to a hacker website that looks like Google that has this pop-up. And that's another play on a sense of authority, right? A lot of people trust Google, and if they see this pop-up, not in an email, but on their browser, and it's representing google.com, a lot of people will fall for this. Currently, many at-home workforce routers are infected with this type of attack, and it's currently running its rounds in the US and France and Germany right now, from what I've read. But some of the currently affected routers are Linksys type routers and D-Link type routers. So it's important to practice security at home as well. So I wanted to riff a little bit here on the convenience over security mindset. And generally, not everyone, but the general consensus is that security is a bit time consuming, and sometimes it's costly and it's inconvenient. Many of us tend to ask, why should we call IT to have meetings on, whether we should turn on these features or install these productivity apps from the Microsoft Store or the Apple Store or the Android Store? Or, we can just turn it on and turn it off whenever we want to. But as I stated before, training and awareness may be our only line of defense. But it doesn't have to be if we implement internal controls over some of these productivity tools that we tend to gravitate to supplement for our at-home work, for our at-home network, if you would. On the screen, we see that there's some confirmed cases of malicious apps from the Microsoft Store, from the Office 365 Store, even the Apple App Store, and of course, Android Google Store. So when we try to supplement our productivity with installing some of these tools without having the correct conversations or having the correct risk assessments, they can open our security. They can break our security and open the cyber attacker's way into our information, if you would. Well, one thing we're seeing is this shelter in place has caused a spike in App Store downloads, and bad actors are taking advantage of the lack of controls that would disallow these types of installations. So I encourage users and organizations to seriously assess the exposure and risk before installing applications that on the surface appear to help with productivity. A good example is a lot of teachers, elementary school and middle school and high school teachers, are advocating installing several different apps into student devices to facilitate the distance learning. For instance, a math app, or our teachers may want a drawing app. Well, if we take into considerations that some of these developers have not been verified in the Microsoft Store, then we could be opening some gates there to our security, if you would. Zoom bombing is kind of prevalent. It's making its circulation through the news right now. The FBI warns of Zoom bombing, where bad actors take full administrative control of Zoom meetings. There's a large number of confirmed cases right now where they've discovered that Zoom had a vulnerability that hackers had exploited. And some hackers will take advantage of having administrator control to your meetings and draw pictures on your screen, or they can just lay dormantly and just listen to all of the protected and privileged conversations. I wanted to touch on some of the quick things that we can do to combat some of the items that we've been seeing amidst the coronavirus pandemic. And I'll go through these relatively quickly, but there are many protective mechanisms available for us. Of course, we can contract digital security engineers who can come in and assess our vulnerabilities and consult on our needs. But this generally takes some time to implement, and even though it is recommended, this is definitely the goal, is to have security engineers come and look at our technology. With the coronavirus pandemic, I know that's not always possible. So on the screen, there's a list of mechanisms that are almost equally knee-jerk protections that we can employ quickly to counteract our current situation with the coronavirus. And the first one is multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication can be implemented relatively quickly. It can be enabled on enterprise email systems like Office 365 and G Suite, and others that have MFA compatibility. There may be some costs involved, but given the spike of business email compromises that we've been seeing, I feel it's a great solution for this list. Also, most VPN solutions are compatible with some type of MFA. And a VPN is basically an encrypted channel or an encrypted tunnel to our organizations. Talk to your IT admin about enabling a VPN and multi-factor authentication on your VPN to see how much this would cost. It really just depends on the equipment that's at play. And some organizations may find that the cost is minimal, but that is the recommended way to connect from your at-home network to your work network, is through a VPN. And if that VPN has MFA enabled, that's best practice. Also, most mobile apps such as Box.com, Dropbox, Gmail, and Salesforce, they have built-in multi-factor compatibility. And most of the time it's off by default. So talk to your IT vendor or your administrator about MFA on cloud apps like this. It will usually require the use of an authenticator app, such as Google Authenticator on your phone. If the multi-factor is enabled on the cloud app, it would generally work like this. So you log in to Box.com, then Box.com sends the app a code, and the code is then, it notifies you saying, hey, from your phone, it will say, hey, somebody's trying to log into Box, and then you just click enable and it allows you in.
Hey, Isaac, we have a couple minutes left.
Okay.
We have like 1 minute left here if you want to get the takeaways.
Sure, yep. So MDM, mobile device management, this will help us protect our internal controls to our mobile devices that are accessing our information. Password management, definitely a must for changing and managing your passwords, such as LastPass and other applications like this. Okay, so our takeaways, without taking too much time, are basically understanding the elements of phishing can help us steer clear of critical data breaches into our organizations, because they can help us detect what the attacks are looking like right now, so we can try to avoid those. Also, understanding that APT groups are actively trying to compromise you and your clients helps us have a heightened sense of security, if you would. We must be careful and not tip the balance of convenience and security by making informed and educated decisions about productivity and technology, and also understanding that there are proactive mechanisms and people and services available to your organizations to help you detect and respond to data breaches. Also, here's a small table of actions that choices on incident response. So no action is obviously bad. A reactive action where you're responding because somebody said, oh, I clicked on an email, that's better. Where, you know, sometimes we may need to have the adequate logs, and some people don't have the adequate logs for us to respond. So any security engineer or security consultant company will help you get up to speed on some of those logs. And then, of course, being proactive about some of the actions to prevent and detect are the best, where you're using multi-factor and a combination of mobile device management on your network to help you analyze some of the activity on your network. That's obviously the best. And with that, I'll kind of turn it over to our mediators. So
Yeah, one thing I'll just add there quick, Isaac, for the organizations on the call. Think about this. Is your organization currently looking at your logs from Office 365, Google G Suite, or your networks? If not, we should be looking at doing that as soon as possible. And every organization has a budget for cybersecurity, and some of these activities of reviewing historical logs isn't a significant cost, but it could save you a lot of time and headache and money down the road. The proactive measures certainly would be best case scenario, and these are just a few. And so if you do have cybersecurity budget for network monitoring, endpoint monitoring, certainly that would be a best practice. We appreciate everyone from attending this webinar, and we wish you the best of luck with your cybersecurity efforts. And hopefully we can mitigate our risk when it comes to these type of compromises that we talked about today.
All right, well, thank you to everyone who attended, and thank you to our presenters. And you can learn more by visiting the website here, and we've also emailed this out so that you have all the links that you need. And here's our contact information if you do have any further questions. So thank you again, and thank you to our presenters, and have a great day, guys.
Thank you, everyone.